5 seconds, which is why I asked you guys to give them some encouragement. If we had stayed silent, do you think they would have made it as far?
No.
Probably not. What if I had sent them one at a time out to the hallway to go do it? Do you think they would have made it as far?
No.
So the encouragement and the audience makes a difference, yes? That's motivation. So that's the psychological part of fatigue. You can't discount motivation when you're talking about fatigue, okay? Just because you're feeling fatigue and discomfort and you're struggling doesn't mean you have to stop. You can keep going until you get to failure. I don't think you guys actually went all the way to failure. I think you guys could have gone farther. I didn't push you. I think you could have.
I hit legs today, man.
Okay. Either walking around or you can sit down. Standing doesn't help you recover. Walking around. Okay, so let me ask you guys this. If I had given you a 10-pound weight vest to wear for that, would you have gone as long? No. Okay, but would you still have been in glycolysis?
Yes.
Okay. What if I had you just jumping every other squat? Could you have gone longer?
Yeah.
Okay, and would you have been in glycolysis?
Yes.
I gotta make sure he's okay.
He's a part of the fine.
You gonna check on his already?
I got it. He's not also working.
You know CPR? No, you know your CPR? Okay. Okay, so the idea is they maxed out at about 45 seconds. But if we gave them a weight vest, maybe they would have made it 25 seconds and still would have been in glycolysis. If we let them jump every other one, they would have gone even longer. Okay, so it depends. How far you are above your lactate threshold is going to determine how long you can stay in glycolysis. There's a wide range here. Okay, so usually if you have to put a number on it, the number is about 2 minutes. But you have to kind of understand that that's not like a number that always applies, because 2 minutes of squat jumps is, for most people, is not reasonable. Okay, go ahead, Gab.
So it just depends on your lactate threshold, right?
No, it depends how far you are above your lactate threshold. If we're in anaerobic glycolysis, by definition, we're above your lactate threshold. So it doesn't matter where your lactate threshold is, because we're going to be above it. But if you're just barely above your lactate threshold, you can stay there for a long time. You can run a mile at your lactate threshold, or above, just barely above your lactate threshold. But if we're this far above your lactate threshold, 45 seconds is it. And if I had given them a vest, 25 seconds would have been it. Okay, and all of that is in glycolysis.
Unfortunately, he's no longer here.
You got water? Okay. Okay. So motivation is important with fatigue. So I like to kind of think about it this way. If I put it on a continuum, an intensity continuum, if rest is here and muscle failure is here, you might start feeling fatigue here. Notice I put that at moderate intensity. That's where most people's lactate threshold is. That's where you're going to start feeling uncomfortable, the beginning of fatigue. Discomfort is the beginning of the onset of fatigue. Okay? So, if you're doing something and you're a little bit above that intensity, most people will quit just beyond the onset of fatigue. And I call that psychological failure. Psychological failure is when you quit, is when you give up. Your body physiologically can go a lot harder than your mind can in most cases, unless you're David Goggins, in which case.
Just about to say.
Yeah, he doesn't have this.
No, at all.
But most people, as soon as they start feeling discomfort, they stop. They're not willing to push close to actual failure. Like when they were doing their squat jumps, Riley, if I started offering you points, could you done a few more? Yeah. Yeah.
You can all do it right now.
Chris, if I got in your face and started yelling at you, would you have done a few more?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, so motivation is what gets you all the way to failure. But at some point, no matter how much I scream at you or how many points I offer you, your muscles are going to fail. And there's no motivation that can get you through that. Okay? But there's a lot of space between fatigue and failure. Go ahead.
If you offered extra credit to the ceiling, I would have done it.
I know you would. Next time. Okay, so what people don't realize is that most results happen here. The closer you get to failure, the more results you're going to see. That's just how the body works, because you have to challenge your body to get it to change. So if you go all the way to failure, or as close to failure as you're willing to go, that's where you're going to see the most results. And most people are not willing to be that uncomfortable. So, if you're talking to someone who said, I've been working out for 4 months and I haven't seen any changes, probably they're giving up as soon as they start feeling something. And they have to push through that discomfort. You have to have discomfort you have to have overload. Overload has to be uncomfortable. Otherwise, you're doing what your body's used to, and then why would your body change? Right? Go ahead, Jonathan.
Do you think you might notice this more aerobically than anaerobically?
Notice it more.
Yeah, because
So the term aerobic is throwing me off here because we're not going to get to failure for working aerobically. But I think you mean sprinting versus weightlifting. Okay, but that's not aerobic. But I know what you mean. So sprinting to failure will get you more results than sprinting to psychological, to giving up before you fail. Yes, weightlifting and sprinting, same. But going all the way to failure increases your risk of injury. So for most people, it's not worth it. If you're a competitive athlete and you win or lose races based on 1/100th of a second, then that extra push is worth it. And we know that athletes do things that normal people don't do. But for a recreational exerciser who may not want to go all the way to failure because of risk of injury, within a few reps of failure or a few seconds of failure, you're going to see more results than if you stop as soon as you struggle. There's a famous quote by Muhammad Ali. I don't know exactly what the quote is, but I can paraphrase it. It's something like, I don't start counting until the reps start hurting because those are the only reps that count. It's very true. Questions on this? All right, let's do aerobic fatigue. What are our aerobic systems? Beta oxidation, electron transport chain, and Krebs cycle. Good. So I lumped those all together because the cause of fatigue is the same. So when we were talking about the ATP-PCR system, we were talking about substrate depletion causing fatigue. In glycolysis, we had byproducts that were causing fatigue. Okay, those are our two main types of fatigue. Either byproducts, metabolic byproducts, or substrate depletion. So, are there any byproducts in the aerobic system? Water is the byproduct. Water is not going to cause fatigue. So there are no byproducts in the aerobic system that cause fatigue. Lactic acid is not an issue here. Okay, so let's look at our substrates. What are the substrates in the aerobic system? Fats and carbohydrates. Okay, running out of fat is not a thing. You can't deplete your fat. Even a very skinny person cannot ever deplete their fat. Fat is considered an unlimited resource. Carbohydrates, on the other hand, are limited. Your ability to store carbohydrates is limited. So the average person can store enough glycogen to last about 2 hours of moderate intensity exercise. Okay? Average person can store enough glycogen to last about 2 hours of aerobic exercise. After that, you hit glycogen depletion, and that is the cause of fatigue in the system. It takes 2 hours, assuming that you're not starving when you go into your workout. 2 hours. So, if someone tries to go for a run, let's assume it's flat and their pace is under their lactate threshold. Do you understand why that's relevant? If they're going above their lactate threshold, they're going to be in glycolysis. So I want to keep them in the aerobic system, so they're going to be at a pace below their lactate threshold. They're running a 10-minute mile pace, and they go 2 miles. So they've been running for 20 minutes, and they stop. What's their cause of fatigue? It's psychological, it's motivation. You're not going to deplete your glycogen in 20 minutes. Lactic acid accumulation, not a problem. Okay? They're just bored. So give them some music to listen to, offer them money if they finish the run, offer them points, whatever motivates this person, get in their face and yell at them, whatever it takes to motivate that person, that's what they need. There's no physiological cause of fatigue there. Does that make sense? So 2 hours, most people don't do cardiovascular activity for more than 2 hours. So fatigue is not usually an issue if you're in your aerobic system. If you're outside running, you're probably encountering hills, which is going to have you going in and out of glycolysis, so it's not the same. Anybody ever run a marathon? We've got the marathon coming up. Anybody running it?
I have a friend.
Okay, but if you've ever run one, or if you've ever known somebody who's run one, how long does it take?
A little more than
3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. I guarantee you it's more than 2. There's only one human on earth who can do it in under 2, and he's not in this room.
And they had a lot of competition.
So it's more than 2, and millions of people do it. So how do they do it? You have to take in some kind of glucose during the marathon. You have to. It's not humanly possible to go for that many hours without taking in some kind of glucose. So it's usually those GU packs, which are just straight glucose. And you just take those sporadically. But someone who tries to run that race without preparing for it and having that, that's when you see people hitting the wall. Hitting the wall is when you run out of glycogen. You pass out. Or you diarrhea, which you see happen in the marathon all the time. Okay, those are symptoms of glycogen depletion, hitting the wall. You have to take in glucose. If you are not exercising, your glycogen stores will last more than 2 hours. You can go 5, 6, 7, 8 hours without eating if you need to. But at some point, you're going to start feeling nauseous and seeing black spots and you're about to pass out. That's hypoglycemia. You have hypoglycemia because you're out of glycogen. So you have to eat something. Okay, so your glycogen stores can last a long time if you're not exercising. But if you're exercising, it's going to last about 2 hours and then you're going to have to feed. Questions on that? That's pretty simple. Go ahead.
Sometimes when you ask about like aerobic fatigue, we just have to mention that we run out of our glycogen depletion, which basically makes you either hit the wall or...
Yeah, it takes 2 hours. So what I'm likely to do with this, so as we get further along in the semester, the questions are going to be less of me asking you to repeat things back to me and more of me giving you situations and having you apply your knowledge to it. So a question for this might be Michaela is running sprint repeats. She's doing 30-second sprints with 30 seconds of rest, and she's doing 15 repeats. What are her primary causes of fatigue? Okay, so we got 30-second sprints, 30 seconds rest, 15 reps. Primary cause of fatigue? I heard PCR depletion, I heard hydrogen accumulation. Which is it?
Hydrogen accumulation.
Hydrogen accumulation. So in order to figure out primary cause of fatigue, you got to figure out what system she's in.
If she's doing sprints and not waiting 3 minutes, wouldn't it also be PCR?
Okay, let's do this. Riley is doing 30-second sprints
Oh, it's 'cause the
with
sprint's
3
less.
minutes rest, 15 rounds. Primary cause of fatigue.
The hydrogen, because it's
Try telling him it's psychological. he's gonna beat you up. It's all in your head, Riley.
I
You're not
stopped
really
every
tired.
20 seconds, so I believe it.
Primary cause of fatigue?
I don't know.
What system are we in here? Glycolysis. How do you know? We've got 3 minutes rest. Why aren't we in ATP PCR?
It'll last more than 10 to 15
We're
seconds.
sprinting for 30 seconds. So we have to be in glycolysis. Don't let the 3 minutes fool you into thinking we're in ATP PCR. Okay, what if I do this? We're doing 10-second sprint repeats, 30 seconds rest, 15 rounds. Primary cause of fatigue.
Now is it Don't
No.
really think so.
This is, glycolysis because we're not touching our foot.
So what's our system? Everybody understand why? The first sprint will be in the ATP PCR system.
Everything after.
The other 14 will be in glycolysis. Because we don't have enough time to replenish our PCR. So just because it's a 10-second sprint doesn't mean it's an ATP PCR system if we're doing the repeats. Okay, you've got to look at the whole picture. Okay, let's say Blake is doing 10-second sprints with 4 minutes rest in between, and he's only doing 2 of them. What's his cause of fatigue at the end of those sprints? If he's doing all-out sprints, 10 seconds. What did I say, 10 seconds, 6 seconds?
2 10.
Okay, so he's doing all-out 10-second sprints.
PCR.
PCR depletion. Okay. Gabby is running a 10-minute mile. And she stops after 4 miles. What is her primary cause of fatigue? Psychological. Okay, so that's the you're gonna get more of those type of questions as we move forward in the class. Okay? Okay, that's gonna be the end of this chapter. So again, there are things on your study guide for this chapter that I'm either not gonna cover at all or I'm gonna cover later. So like the neurological fatigue is on there, I'm not gonna cover that. Cramps are in there, I'm not gonna cover that. It's in the book if you wanna read it. The delayed onset muscle soreness, I'm gonna push off to a different chapter. I'm not gonna cover that right now. Okay, so let's take 5 minutes, let's come back at 5:15.